Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pop Crime TV's The Outlier Podcast. I'm Lauren Conlon, and today we are going to dive back into a case that pretty much sounds like something out of a horror movie, but unfortunately, it's all too real. Sarah Boone, a 47-year-old Florida woman, was sentenced in December of 2024 to life in prison for the brutal and disturbing murder of her boyfriend, Jorge Torres. Sarah Boone, as many of you know, she didn't use a knife, she didn't use a gun, she didn't use any sort of conventional weapon to kill her boyfriend. Instead, she zipped Jorge Torres into a suitcase, left him trapped inside for hours, and then proceeded to record herself mocking his desperate pleas for help. She said things like, quote, "That's what you get," as he gasped for air, struggling to escape. And by the time she finally opened the suitcase, he unfortunately was deceased. But here's where it gets a little more complicated. Boone took the stand in her own defense, claiming she was a victim of domestic abuse, suffering from, quote, battered spouse syndrome. She described years of violence at the hands of Jorge Torres, including physical beatings, SA, and psychological torment. So did she actually snap in this moment of psychological distress, or was this cold and calculated? Today, I am joined by renowned forensic psychologist and host of the Killer Psychologist Podcast and CEO and founder of California Forensic Psychology, Dr. Dana Anderson. And Dr. Anderson is going to break down what could have possibly been going on in Sarah Boone's head to contribute to this horrific act of violence, And Dr. Anderson's work is crucial in the aftermath of violent crimes, such as homicides, suicides, and sexual assaults. So just stick with us as we uncover the psychological depths of this very disturbing case. All right, I'm going to stop talking and bring in my special guest, Dr. Dana Anderson. Hello, Dr. Dana. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. So Dr. Dana and I, just really quickly, we are in the same documentary episode right now on Fox Nation about Luigi Mangione and Brian Thompson, the slain CEO of United Healthcare. And I saw you on the special. We had never met before. And I added you, I think, on Instagram or on Facebook because I loved everything that you had to say.
Oh, I'm so excited to meet you. It was so much fun because when I saw the episode and I saw you on there, I'm like, oh my gosh, can we be friends?
Yes.
Can we get together? Like, she seems really nice.
Well, and also I had said this to you, I'm just such a motor mouth and I'm always going at, a million miles an hour. And I just loved how you were so thoughtful and careful with everything you say. And I'm like, wow, I should take a page in her book and maybe think a little bit before I talk, if that makes sense.
Well, being a licensed psychologist, there are legal ramifications. And so I am cognizant about it in the back of my head that I'm always careful not to overstate my opinion on things.
Yes, that is a really good point. And so just so everybody knows, Dr. Dana Anderson has never treated Sarah Boone. This is her expert opinion on what she has observed. So let's go into the psychology of this crime. Now, in your professional opinion, what psychological factors could have driven or contributed to Sarah Boone thinking that this was okay? Zipping George in a suitcase and listening to him suffer and watching him suffer was okay, and perhaps there would be no consequences.
Yeah, so a lot of times I get cases like this where I'm court ordered to evaluate a defendant who's on trial for, say, homicide. And so I'll interview them and find out more about them psychologically to determine, say, if they have a diagnosis, if any, such as this battered spouse syndrome. It used to be called battered women syndrome. Now it's referred to as battered spouse syndrome. So if I were to evaluate her, I may do some psychological testing and a thorough interview and evaluation and look at her medical records and documents to see if she was in therapy or if she had a diagnosis, was she taking any medication? And also, she alleges that she was abused by her partner. So I'm going to be looking at the criminal records and the details because she can allege, and in fact, George, according to the records, was arrested 4 times and she allegedly bailed him out each time. So
Right.
I'm really curious about that. What happened? And when you look at those records, there's a lot of information in there about what the police saw, their body cam footage, what her statement was, whether she recanted, who had the injuries. And all of that is going to help me determine whether, in fact, she was a battered spouse, whether or not she qualifies for a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. And in order to have that diagnosis, there has to be a valid claim, not a made-up one. Was there, in fact, abuse? And even if she did suffer some abuse in their relationship, that's not a defense. So,
Right. I mean, I read one of the 2019, I think, police reports where truthfully, they seemed like they were both at fault. And this was the one where he was claiming that she was kicking him down the stairs or vice versa. And look, in the trial, we learned that Jorge Torres was literally 100 pounds soaking wet. So I was like, whoa. This was a really tiny guy. I'm not diminishing anything that went on, but I had this new saying in my head during this trial. I was like, wow, we should believe all women except Sarah Boone. And I'm sorry, I'm saying that on the record right now. I can't help it because she was so, like, it just was so unbelievable to me. And I think that, and listen, when I say unbelievable, I guess I mean everything that she said on the stand with the interviews. And listen, I'm crazy. I watched the 6-hour interview she did with police initially, and I watched the body cam footage where she just contradicted herself so many times. And it was like, me. I'm not a doctor, but I thought she showed signs of narcissism. But yeah, go ahead.
well, and I want to touch on that. So that discredits her. So people that make inconsistent statements. So we're going back to her diagnosis. So as a psychologist evaluating her, so she lacks credibility. So she's making a lot of statements turn out to be not proven to be true, and that's not going to help her legal defense at all.
Right. Or state, like, again, I'm not saying he didn't stab her. I don't know, but she basically says he stabbed her and her entire living room was just full of blood and she almost died. I'm like, really? You almost died, but there's no hospital record of that? Oh, he wouldn't let me go to the hospital, but yet you almost I don't quite understand it. And just pivoting a little bit because I feel like alcohol played a huge role in their relationship. And it played a big role the night that Jorge Torres tragically died. You could tell Sarah Boone was slurring her words. I mean, she repeatedly abused alcohol, as did he. I'm not victim shaming this, it's just that's what went down in their household. So that night, I mean, it sounds like she possibly got a little drunk and then she says she passed out. Then the next morning when she found his body is when she had this remorse, maybe. I don't even know if it was remorse because it didn't look like it. It looked maybe like she was like, oops, daisy. Like, I wish that didn't happen, but it did.
Yeah, and you notice in her statement that was recorded, she ended up saying he forced her to drink and she had to urinate on herself. So there was so much this external projection of blame.
Yeah.
Blaming him for everything, even forcing her to drink. Right.
Is that narcissism? Like, blame. I don't even know what the definition is, but I feel like she is a narcissist.
Yeah, so narcissism is really interesting, and talking about like narcissistic traits. I don't know that she's been formally evaluated or been given that diagnosis. But here's the thing about narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissists, they don't go to therapy. And the only time I see them is when they're court ordered. They do not want to be there. They do not agree with you. And I am telling you, the extreme cases of narcissistic personality disorder are a lot of times in CPS cases, if you would believe that. And they're the ones, they fire their attorney. They disagree with everything I say. They will get me on the stand, and this has happened multiple times. So they want to represent themselves because they can't work with anyone. They disagree with what everyone says.
Wait a minute. This is Sarah Boone because she had 9 attorneys and then she represented herself for a while. That is so interesting. She fits that right there. 9
the
attorneys.
Clients that I've had to do court-ordered evals, they have fired their attorneys because they can't work with anyone. And then they want to get me on the stand to prove to me that I was wrong and I didn't do what they wanted and I didn't follow the directions. And it's all about like maintaining that power and control. So now they have me in a position of power of like, but they create a whole nother narrative. But through that process, right? Through the process. Now imagine it going down in court. It's so apparent to everyone in the courtroom, like who they are. They have showed who they are, like in not a good and flattering way, by the way. Okay.
Right. And everyone can see it except for them.
Right. And even in the end, if they sit there and the judge makes a decision, they'll say, I disagree. And it will just go on. So they're not going to accept it.
This sounds exactly like Sarah Boone. It does.
So the themes in her apology, which are so revealing, people just give themselves away. So if you look at her when she's reading her response, so it's not authentic, it's not genuine. It's very superficial and shallow. Her emotions are not congruent with the words she's reading. Not even trying that hard to even give pause or even just like hear the tone in your voice, right?
Yeah.
Like she didn't even give a lot of effort. So someone that's maybe more intelligent or could play that part a little better.
Right. And she's actually gone as far as to say that, what did she say to police? She said she was good or she excelled at everything. That's what she said. She said, I excel at everything. She talks about how she was a straight A student during her interview with police initially. And this is like what you're saying after your boyfriend was killed, that you're a straight A student, or you were, and that you excel at everything. And I want to play for everybody just to refresh people who might have forgotten her quote apology on the stand at sentencing. But before I get there, I also want to remind people, and maybe you've dealt with this, but I mean, this woman has been in prison jail since 2020. 4 years later, it's time for her trial. And before the trial, they offer her a plea, and they basically say, we'll give you, I think it was like maybe 10 years or something like that if you just plead guilty now, plus time served. She literally could have been out in like 5 years or something. And don't quote me on that. I'm blanking on the plea deal, but it was such a good deal. And I had to wonder, I mean, her attorney must have been like, girl, you got to take this. What are you doing? Take this. But she said no, she wanted to go to trial. And that is another form of narcissism, is it not? Thinking that you did no wrong.
Well, let me tell you, narcissists are their own worst enemy. And they can make bad decisions. And a lot of times I'm interviewing defendants for competency or, some court order, right? And they'll deliberately like make these bad decisions just to, I want to be honest, some of them like the theatrics of having a trial or having that attention or having the control, being in control of the narrative so they can tell the story how they want you to perceive them, right? And it's so
Yeah.
she really created a whole story that she's reading for you because she's trying to change your emotional response to her. It's not how
Right.
she really feels. And just to clarify, people with narcissistic traits, they don't like themselves. They actually have
Wow.
some self-hate and they realize they're inadequate or insecure. Um, but those of us that know that have imperfections or insecurities, we can admit it or we're working on it or we can talk about it. Narcissists really try to control how other people perceive them, and they want you to perceive them as, and it's interesting what you said, bringing up good grades or something. A lot of times in interviews, people will bring up um, unrelated things about them, whether they were an honor student or straight
Mm.
A's or something sort of, it's unrelated or off topic. And they sort of want you to go down that road, like saying these good things about themselves, right? They may have a hard time finding certain things or like certain achievements or whether they were a
Yeah.
sports star or a
Right.
model or
Well,
reminding you.
she also said something like, she's like, and I'm a really great mom or something like that. And I'm here and I'm like, wow, I mean, I do a lot for my kids. I love my kids more than anything, but I constantly feel inadequate, like I'm not doing enough and that I could be doing more with them. And I pretty much go to sleep feeling guilty every night that I didn't spend enough time with them. And my husband's like, what more, and I'm like, wow, this is so interesting that, she's sitting. I wish I could be like that sometimes, but then I'm like, well, is it normal to constantly pat yourself on the back? I mean, I might be a little bit more self-deprecating than I should be, but I thought of that immediately and I'm like, I don't think that and I don't mean to like compare myself, but I just don't think that I ever have sat down and been like, I am so good at this, you guys. I am so amazed. Like I just don't I just don't feel that way about myself. But yeah, just going back to the flyer she made, she actually said on the flyer when she was looking for an attorney, something like that, you will be on TV, you will be like a media star type of thing. So that also tells me she was putting on a show a little bit.
Wow. And so I don't know about her family situation or kids, but she did mention in her apology, blaming everyone, um, blaming social media,
Mhm.
blaming the world, and then saying like family law is the new prey, like, because that's another case. But it's not shocking. So it would be interesting to see her history of maybe CPS reports or interventions, because her parenting style and um, interestingly enough, I do court ordered CPS evals.
Oh.
And sometimes, well, I'll give you one example. I had a parent, a female parent, who was so narcissistic that she was getting her parental rights taken away because she couldn't even have empathy or remorse or care for her kids. She was doing drugs or locking them in the closet also, but like
Oh my
just
gosh.
demanded they be returned to her as a matter of possession. And her just lack of insight of saying, do this, they are mine, like I have rights to them. But she saw it so transactional in nature, as in ownership. So that, and it's they lack this insight and awareness. They really try to gaslight and present themselves in different ways, but yet in the end, like, there's this history that reveals who they really are. And so she can't just come to court and change the whole script and read
Right.
us the script. Like, the evidence shows otherwise.
Yeah, and what was also interesting is during her sentencing, I mean, and maybe I missed this during some of her initial police interviews. I don't think I did, but it's people that she had religious affiliation with, or people from her old church. I just never once heard her mention God or Jesus or being a Christian. Not once did I hear her mention that until sentencing came, and then I'm like, oh, now she has church friends or people that. So I thought
Yeah.
that was, yeah,
Yeah.
like Weird.
Throw God under the bus. But she makes it sound like God and her are best friends. In fact, she said, she said, in the end, like, this experience has been the greatest experience for her because she's found God and it's brought her closer to God. So playing the God card, it's not uncommon when I interview defendants. So, because they try to just throw out some spirituality as if like that cleanses them, or you're going to gaslight me into thinking that that makes you have some sort of moral compass. Like,
right.
Well, I found God and I'm praying for him and I talk to him every day. But she does it in such a superficial, insincere way, just trying to throw out religion at the last minute.
Mm-hmm.
It's really not sincere.
I did not find it sincere. I found nothing that she said sincere. So let's refresh our memories here. I'm going to pull up her sentencing, and what I usually do, just so it doesn't take forever, I'm going to put the playback speed at 1.2. Let's try, actually 1.5. Let's see how this works. And if it's too fast, I'll change it. But let's see what she had to say just for a few minutes.
Address everyone in my apology on top of my...
Oop.
You may proceed, ma'am.
Kento Sukuroi is a kind of Japanese ceramic style which means to repair with gold. In this tradition, when a ceramic piece breaks, an artisan will fuse the pieces back together again using liquid gold or gold dust lacquer. So rather than being covered up, the breaks become more obvious and a brilliant new piece of art emerges from the brokenness. It embraces flaws, weakness, and imperfections, and also teaches the essence of resilience. Every crack in a ceramic piece is a part of its history, and each piece becomes more beautiful because it has been broken. This is the wisdom of Kento Sukuroi. In my wisdom and with all of my repairs, then, now, and ongoing, God is, has been, and will always be my artisan. All of my gold is forgiveness. This has held me together, made me shine brighter, and overcome the damage caused by Jorge Torres, the Torres family, the justice system, Orange County Corrections Department, social media, scoundrel detectives, infamy, defamation, ongoing constitutional rights violations, second-degree murder, forced into being pro se. Just as gold is very precious, forgiveness is invaluable. Forgiveness is not an attempt to change or forget who, what, or how you've lived through to be so gold, but an act of grace, humility, and considerable self-compassion to be set free from sorrow. Withholding forgiveness denies your brilliance and adds even greater grief and deeper heartache, irreparable cracks on top of the already that no one deserves, no matter the pain or disappointment, untruths or injustice. It doesn't matter. As the more broken you are, even though now different than before, you've become more outstanding and more extraordinary. Above all, when you let go of blame, misunderstandings, excuses, give up your anger and cease from resentment, this is forgiven. And when you forgive, you heal. And when you heal, you move forward. My goal begins with Jorge Torres, and every time he slapped me, kicked, punched, spit on, raped, stabbed, choked, laughed at, pushed, pulled, dragged, whipped, tripped, stole from, lied, terrorized, threatened, humiliated, forced, degraded, made me cry. Every time he tried to end me, defeat, or destroy. I forgive George for beating me senseless, for trying to sleep because I had to go to work or my son's field trip the next day, for ruining my deceased family's heirlooms, traditions, and keepsakes, my son's furniture, destroying the television we watched together, for wrecking our townhome by breaking windows, punching holes in the walls and doors, ramming his entire body into glass doors, kicking in my front and back door over and over and over, for breaking or removing the locks from all of the doors and sometimes the knobs altogether, so I had nowhere to feel safe, including the sacred space of my son's room where he beat me bloody on his bed. For terrorizing and threatening my blind and deaf dogs by leaving the gate open I built to keep them safe, telling me he hoped I'd find their bloated dead body in the pond or scrape their remains off of the pavement, for kicking them off of the bed and throwing across the room because they were trying to protect me. for threatening to make me unrecognizable to my son by breaking all of the bones in my face, like his brother Moses did to him after he kept seeing.
I'm gonna stop because I think everybody gets the picture here, because this does go on for a while. I mean, talk about victim shaming. I'm floored, really. I mean, a jury found her guilty already of murder, and again, a jury of her peers found that this murder wasn't substantiated. She was not a battered spouse, or, you know, I mean, what are your thoughts here on everything she just said?
Well, even if someone was a battered spouse and there was abuse, one of the things that I would be looking for is adding those extra unnecessary details. And so I'm talking about things that aren't true. And so she made a lot of accusations in that narrative. And here's what happens sometimes is people, in their own mission to get their story across, right, they make up details. And so they're called lies. Okay.
Yeah.
But they'll embellish the truth, right? And so that is, you know, her credibility. And we're talking across time. So if you're taking this, you know, obviously it's already went to trial, but if I was looking at a case, I'm looking at all these things across time. Each time law enforcement came to interview her statements, right? What is all this leading up to her statements about being a battered person? So whether that's true or not. And so the psychologist, there was a Dr. Harper that diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder and the battered spouse. Well, battered spouse syndrome isn't a diagnosis per se, but she's saying that she believed that she did suffer from PTSD. So I think that's interesting. Now, when I test for PTSD, and I do often, and I do malingering assessments too. So malingering is lying for secondary gain. So you got a lot to lose. You got a lot on the line. So it's not uncommon for someone to exaggerate the truth or make up things. And when you assess for PTSD, well, first of all, sometimes people just boldly make up incidences, but they can also add a lot of unnecessary details or symptoms of PTSD that they're not familiar with, but they'll end up endorsing, saying they have every single symptom of PTSD, which isn't realistic. And it's, so what happens is during my evaluation, I'll find that people are exaggerating their claims, and that in fact, maybe I find that they do not qualify for that diagnosis. And in fact, in some cases, I've diagnosed them instead with personality disorder or personality disorders, in fact, or the diagnosis can be complex. So you can have some narcissistic traits, you could have some borderline personality traits, and some other traits too, you know, even being histrionic. So nobody's diagnosis just fits perfectly into one box. But whatever psychologist evaluates her should do a thorough assessment and looking at all those factors, because the devil is in the details. And so I wouldn't want to put myself up testifying unless I really did believe that that was accurate. I noticed that is Dr. Tanya Warner. So there was some statement of her agreeing with the battered spousal syndrome, which I thought was interesting. And again, I don't have all the information. One thing I would be curious is that in 2018, she allegedly strangled him.
Yeah, I saw that too. But so, okay. But again, she no charges were filed to my knowledge. Everything was dismissed, just like everything else. But, and I, for one, I appreciate every single expert on every side, defense experts, you know, state experts. I really do appreciate what they do and their expert opinion. Part of me has to think here that they knew they needed someone, a psychologist, to testify to this. How many did they go through? That's what I want to know. How many did they go through until they got the answer that they wanted? Because again, I don't necessarily buy it. I'm not a doctor, and I don't know everything that was taken, into account here. But something that I have to wonder is, if you followed the Ashley Benefield, the Black Swan trial, there was a lot of witnesses on both sides really negating what the other said. So, you had Doug Benefield's daughter that was like, no, he didn't hit me. He didn't hit her. He yelled at her. He did this, that, but he didn't smack us around. And then, you had, I forget who it was, but it's just like in the trial for Sarah Boone, you didn't have any of her friends or any of their mutual friends being like, oh yeah, I saw, George was horrible to her. He really, it was just like neighbors who could hear them arguing through the wall, which in my opinion is like, it takes two to tango.
Mhm.
So I just thought that was really interesting, where it's like, yes, if you need an expert on either side, you will get one. It's just going to be a battle of the experts. And I just want to know how many they went through to get the answer they wanted. You know what I mean?
Yes, and I am retained by the defense or the plaintiff, and I just tell the truth about what I find. In fact, sometimes it's not good for your client at all, okay?
Right, right.
And I tell them exactly, like, in fact, sometimes I'm hired ex parte, so meaning the court, the prosecution doesn't know I'm hired, and I do a full psych eval, and I go, this is bad.
Whoa.
Like, no, and I'll produce a report, and I don't have to produce it to the judge or the court, and they can hold on to it and maybe produce it later.
Yeah.
But I can tell them that my conclusion is what I came up with is like, right, it's not good for your client.
So in that case, they're not going to, put you on the stand and retain you for the trial or anything. They just retain you for an evaluation. Is that what you mean? Because that's interesting.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's different. Sometimes I'm appointed by the judge. Most of the time, the judge or the court, and my report goes directly, and the court has it, so everyone has it. Even then,
Wow.
nobody's calling me to testify because it's not good for their client. Well, I'm just. So it's just the truth of the matter. So I'm impartial. Whoever hires me, I just provide an accurate and thorough psychological evaluation. And when I believe in it, I'll testify to it, right? If someone does in fact have PTSD, I am happy to discuss that. But also, I did a rape case. There was multiple convictions of rape. So I was doing sentencing. They had me do a psych eval, and that guy did in fact have PTSD, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't going to help his sentencing, by the way. He had a number of other issues, but I'm just saying, you might find that incredulous, like unbelievable, but someone could also. So someone could. So let's just say she was tested and they said she did, and let's just say, but keep in mind, PTSD doesn't mean it's related to this event. It could be from childhood trauma, past sexual abuse, prior domestic violence. So just keep that in mind. So you don't take this traumatic event, like it could be, and then that's what I'd want to know, right?
Right.
Yeah. You could take your past trauma from another relationship, or different events. And so what I'm saying is you'd qualify for the diagnosis, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like unrelated to this relationship. So
yeah, it's not going to get you off of a murder charge, basically. I mean, like, multiple things can be true. That's my favorite phrase. I say it way too much, but it fits for everything. That's the point of that phrase. Multiple things can be true. So I guess in conclusion here, based on everything, in your expert opinion, I mean, the jury got it right. Do you believe that she truly acted out in this deliberate act of potentially revenge? And I wouldn't even call this I wouldn't call this like escaping a hellish relationship for safety. I would call it revenge personally. And I don't know if you agree with that, but I'm just curious.
Well, a couple things I find interesting is the symbolism of a suitcase,
Ooh,
like
like
the
leaving.
ultimate disposal, right? To end or their desire to contain a chaotic relationship. Like just the symbolism, even in cases where you're buying trash bags or throwing them away, just but I think the suitcase tells a lot about her. I have questions about how she got him into the suitcase, but understanding that, how big he was, that may help me understand that he actually was, smaller than myself. Right. So, because my first question was, how could he fit in a suitcase? I'm like, could I fit in a suitcase? I looked at my suitcase and I go, I don't know if I could.
No, I have like 30 pounds plus on this guy. I'm just going to say, and if I have that much weight, she's got more weight on him. But just to clarify, they were playing hide and seek and they were drinking. So she said, oh, it'd be so funny if you hid in that suitcase. And he was drunk. So he kind of crawled in fetal position and she was able to zip it up. I personally think, based on the injuries that I saw in the autopsy report with, he had some injuries like bruising to his face, and that could have been like him trying to get out. But the injuries that were present made me think that maybe she kicked the suitcase. I know she flipped it over in the second video, but I was like, did she just like sit there and just kick him in the head? I had so many questions, but that wasn't really answered. But it's funny you brought up the symbolism about just, containing him in there in the suitcase. I was thinking like she was going to leave the relationship. Like, let me pack up and leave, or pack you up and leave. But that's so funny.
Yeah. So there's Melanie McGuire, the suitcase killer.
Oh,
That's
I don't know this
another
one.
case, right? That we could unpack next time because
Wow.
yeah, there's another suitcase killer. Melanie McGuire was a registered nurse who was convicted of killing her husband, William McGuire, in 2004 and dismembered the body and packed it in a suitcase and threw it in the Chesapeake Bay.
Oh, lovely. Got it.
So,
okay. Got it. I had not heard of that one.
So that sounds a little more premeditative, and they're very different, but so that's the only other case that I can think of that involved a suitcase. So here's a question that I would have. So if she did in fact strangle him in a prior domestic violence incident, that's very alarming and disturbing. So strangling someone, cutting off their airway, like causing them to not breathe. Yeah. And I would be very curious if he suffered a loss of consciousness or had sustained some injuries. And the reason why I would be very interested is because if I was going to try to put someone in a suitcase, typically men strangle their victims, typically women, but they can strangle them into unconsciousness, and then you move their body and pack them up. And you can even move them and pack them up even when they're still like unconscious, but alive, right? So, and you could have a few minutes of time to do that. So strangulation is an extreme form of power and control. It's ultimate. Basically, you're saying, I'm a killer. If you're holding your hand to strangle someone, the ability to take someone's life, right? And so these are details I don't have, but certainly that's not sounding like battered spouse syndrome, right?
Yeah.
I mean, those are definitely details I would be very, very curious about as it comes to leading up to what's the correct diagnosis for her. One of the last questions I want to know is what type of psychological testing they used, if any. And maybe, right, if you're representing yourself in pro per, maybe you can just reject any psychologist you don't want to evaluate you. or you
Right.
reject all the opinions. You just reject all of them. And you just get someone else.
Right, right. I mean, it's interesting that the strangulation, I forgot about that. I have not seen that police report. Like I mentioned, everything that happened between them, it sounds like it was just all settled. However, this just goes back and tells me once again that it takes two to tango, and that it wasn't the fact that he was the aggressor every single time. It sounds like it was, if again, I wasn't there, I wasn't part of their relationship, but it sounds like it was both of them. And she 100% has a few screws loose, in my non-expert opinion. Non-expert. But Dr. Dana Anderson, this has been so informative. I really thank you for coming on the show, and I hope you'll come back and join me again. I have your website and everything plugged into the episode notes, your podcast, your social media handle, so everybody can follow you. You have a YouTube as well, so everyone should head over there as well. What is your YouTube handle?
Killer Psychologist.
You guys heard it here. Dr. Dana Anderson. You won't notice this. I mean, hello.